The groom never showed up, but the bride refused to leave, not for 1 hour, not for 1 day. For 3 entire days, she stood at the altar in her white wedding gown, waiting for a man who was never coming. The guests went home. The musicians packed their instruments. Even her own family begged her to remove the dress. She refused. On the 3rd day, the exhausted priest looked at her and asked, "My daughter, what exactly do you want me to do?" She looked him straight in the eyes and whispered, "If the groom will not come, then marry me to this wedding." The church fell silent. They called her insane. They laughed as the priest did the unthinkable. He married a woman to a day. From that moment, she stopped answering Zola. She called herself Mrs. Wednesday. But while the whole village laughed, something hidden beyond the ancient trees smiled. And before a single year had passed, the woman everyone mocked became the most powerful woman they had ever seen. The terrifying part, the groom disappearing, was never an accident. If you love unforgettable African stories with shocking twists, subscribe to the channel, turn on notifications, and tell us where you're watching from. Now, let's find out why a bride married a wedding instead of a groom. In Umu Okoro village, everyone knew one woman. Her name was Adaora Zola Okoro. If kindness had a face, it looked like hers. At 45 years old, she was still breathtaking. Smooth brown skin, bright eyes, a gentle smile that made frightened children feel safe. She walked with quiet confidence, never proud, never loud. People respected her, not because she was rich, but because she changed lives. Every morning before sunrise, she unlocked the doors of her little school. The building was old. The roof leaked whenever heavy rain fell. The desks were worn out. Some children had no shoes. Others came without books. Zola never sent anyone away. If a child could not pay, she paid for them. If they came hungry, she fed them. If they had nowhere to study, she stayed after class until sunset. Many girls in Umu Okoro became nurses, teachers, and business owners because of one woman, Zola. Whenever they returned to the village, they always stopped at her school first. Not their family homes, her school. They hugged her, they cried, then they whispered the same words. "You changed my life." She always smiled. Go and change someone else's. That was who she was. She gave, even when nobody gave back. But every blessing she gave others seemed to avoid her own life. Every Christmas, every New Year, every village festival, the same question followed her like a shadow. "So, when are we dancing at your wedding?" Some asked with love, others asked with pity. A few asked just to wound her. She always laughed. "When God says it is time." Then she changed the subject. But every night, when her front door closed, the smile disappeared. She lived alone. One empty chair, one empty dining table, one silent bedroom. Sometimes she cooked for 2 without thinking. Then she remembered there was no second person. She quietly packed away the extra plate and ate alone. People believed no man had ever wanted her. They were wrong. Many had come. A wealthy trader from Enugu, a lawyer from Owerri, a chief with 3 houses. Even a senator once sent elders to speak to her family. She said no, every time. The village did not understand. Some called her proud, others called her too picky, but nobody knew the truth. Each time she agreed to consider a man, something happened. A strange dream, always the same. She would find herself standing beneath a giant ancient tree. The wind would blow. Leaves would dance around her. Then a calm voice whispered, "Wait, your husband is still walking." Every single time. She always woke before seeing the man's face. The dream frightened her, but it also filled her heart with peace. So, she waited. 1 year became 5. 5 became 10. 10 became 20. Until people stopped believing her wedding would ever happen. Then, everything changed. One hot afternoon, a black SUV rolled into Umu Okoro. Children chased after it. Dust filled the road. The vehicle stopped in front of the village square. A tall man stepped out, clean-shaven, well-dressed, calm, confident. His name was Soma. He was 40, an architect, a widower. His wife had died 3 years earlier during childbirth. Since then, he had buried himself in work, until business brought him to Umu Okoro. The first person he met was Zola. She was helping 2 little boys repair a broken classroom window. Their eyes met, only for a second. Neither of them spoke, but something shifted. Over the next few weeks, Soma kept finding reasons to visit the school. Sometimes he brought books, sometimes pencils, sometimes fresh paint. Other times he came with nothing at all, just conversation. He never tried to impress her with money, never spoke about his success. Instead, he listened, really listened. He asked about her dreams, her childhood, her students. He laughed at her jokes. She laughed at his. Slowly, the walls around her heart began to fall. For the first time in years, people noticed something different. Zola was smiling again. Real smiles, the kind that reached her eyes. 6 months passed. The village watched their love grow. Children teased them whenever they walked together. "Hey, Teacher Zola has found her husband, oh." Old women smiled from their verandas. Young girls whispered, "I want a love like theirs." Even the village elders nodded with joy. One evening, beneath the same orange sky that had watched Zola wait for 20 years, Soma knelt down. He held out a simple ring, not the biggest, not the most expensive, but given with trembling hands. "Zola, I cannot replace your past, and you cannot replace mine, but will you walk into tomorrow with me?" Tears filled her eyes. She did not answer immediately. Instead, she looked toward the distant forest. For one brief moment, she remembered the strange dream, the giant tree, the whisper, "Your husband is still walking." A warm breeze touched her face. Then it was gone. She smiled. Yes. The village exploded with celebration. At last, their beloved Zola was getting married. Preparations began immediately. Women sang while cooking. Men built canopies. Tailors worked through the night. 3 fat cows were bought. Musicians arrived from nearby towns. Guests promised to travel from far away. People said no wedding in Umuokoro had ever been this grand. Even the oldest man in the village smiled and declared God remembered Zola. For the first time in 20 years, she believed it too. The wedding morning arrived. The church overflowed with people. Music filled the air. White flowers lined the aisle. The choir sang with joy. Zola stood outside the church in her beautiful white gown. Her hands trembled, not with fear, with gratitude. After 20 years of waiting, today was finally her day. The church doors opened. Everyone stood. She began walking slowly toward the altar. People wiped tears from their faces. Some clapped softly. Others whispered, "What a beautiful bride." The priest smiled as she reached him. Then his smile faded. The groom's place was empty. At first, nobody worried. He must be outside. 10 minutes passed, then 30, then 1 full hour. Soma was nowhere to be found. His family searched every road. His phone had vanished. Even the horse that brought him toward the church was missing. Nobody knew where he had gone. And before the sun began to set, the whispers started. He ran away. He found another woman. She was cursed all along. Zola heard every word, but she did not move. By evening, the church was almost empty. The music had stopped. The flowers were still there. The white chairs were still arranged. But the groom was nowhere to be found. One by one, the guests began leaving. Some shook their heads. Some whispered. Some did not even bother hiding their laughter. Zola heard them. She heard every word, but she stayed. Her white wedding gown still looked perfect. Her veil still rested gently over her hair. Her bouquet was still in her hands. Her face was calm. Her family begged her, "Zola, please come home." She shook her head. "Go." Her mother started crying. "Come home with us." Zola looked at the empty altar. Then she spoke quietly. "A wedding was prepared today. I came to be married." Her mother stared at her. "Married to whom?" Zola did not answer. She simply looked at the flowers. "I am not leaving unmarried." That was when people began to fear her. Not because she shouted, not because she cried, but because she looked completely certain. Night came. The church became dark. The last person left. Even the priest went home. But Zola stayed. She placed her bouquet beside the altar. Then she lay down on a small church bench, still wearing white, still wearing her veil, still waiting. Outside, the wind began to blow. The church windows rattled softly. And somewhere beyond the trees, a strange sound came from the forest. Zola opened her eyes. She listened. Nothing. She closed them again. Then she smiled, as if someone had whispered something only she could hear. Morning came, and the whole village heard the news. The bride is still there. People rushed to the church. By sunrise, dozens had gathered. Some came to help, but many came to laugh. One man pointed at her. "She has finally lost her mind." Another laughed. "Maybe she thinks the groom will appear from heaven." Someone else shouted, "Make way for Mrs. Wedding." The crowd burst into laughter. Zola said nothing. She simply sat beneath the altar, still in white, still calm. By afternoon, people started recording Zola on their phones. Some stood close, others whispered from a distance. Children copied the way she walked. They lifted imaginary wedding dresses. Everyone laughed. Zola did not. She simply looked toward the ancient forest. The trees stood far beyond the church, tall, dark, silent. And for the first time, she felt that familiar warmth in her chest, the same peace that always came after the voice in her dreams. Wait, your husband is still walking. But now, she wondered, walking from where? That evening, something strange happened. A young boy was returning home when he stopped near the church. He heard laughter. Not human laughter. It was soft, slow, almost playful, coming from the ancient forest. The boy froze. He looked toward the trees. Nothing moved. Then the laughter stopped. He ran home. Nobody believed him.
"Forest spirits don't laugh," his father said. "Go to bed." The next night, another person heard it. Then another. Always after dark. Always from the same place. The forest. But nobody went there. Not even the bravest hunters. Because the forest had always carried stories. Stories nobody liked to discuss. Then came the third morning. Just before sunrise, an old man entered the village. He walked slowly. His clothes were simple. His hair was completely white. He carried a wooden walking stick. One of his eyes was cloudy. The other was sharp, very sharp. The villagers became silent when they saw him. It was Father Emmanuel, the oldest priest Umokoro had ever known. He was nearly 90 years old. He had served the church for more than 60 years. He had buried kings, married chiefs, blessed newborn babies, and witnessed things people only whispered about. He walked straight toward the church. Nobody stopped him. He entered, looked at Zola, and asked, "My daughter, what do you want me to do for you?" Zola looked at him. Then she answered, "If the groom will not come, then marry me to this wedding." Silence. Complete silence. Nobody laughed. Nobody moved. Even the children stopped whispering. Father Emmanuel stared at her for several seconds. Then he slowly turned toward the empty altar.
Father Emmanuel opened the Bible. The church became completely silent. He stood before the empty space where Soma should have been. Then he spoke. Today, his voice was low. This woman shall marry the covenant prepared for her. A gasp moved through the church. Someone whispered, "Father, there is no groom." Father Emmanuel raised one hand. "Be silent." Then he turned to Soma. "What name shall you carry?" For the first time in 3 days, Zola smiled. A peaceful smile, almost like she had been waiting for that exact question. She lifted her head and said, "Mrs. Wednesday." Nobody laughed, not this time. Father Emmanuel opened the marriage register. He wrote her name, then he signed beneath it. No groom, no husband, no explanation. Just one woman and one mysterious covenant. The moment the pen left the paper, a cold breeze moved through the church. The candles flickered, the flowers trembled. Everyone turned toward the windows. Beyond the trees, something moved, only for a second. Then came that soft laughter, the same laughter the villagers had heard for 2 nights. Father Emmanuel slowly closed the register. His face was pale. "Do not follow her." Nobody understood. Follow who? He looked at Zola. On Wednesdays. Then he walked away. Within days, everyone knew about Mrs. Wednesday. Newspapers carried the story. Radio hosts laughed about it. People traveled from other towns just to see her. Some called her crazy. Some called her cursed. Others called her a woman who had finally lost her dignity. Even her own relatives stopped defending her. But Zola never fought back. She never explained herself. She simply continued living. And every Wednesday, something strange happened. She woke before sunrise. She wore white. She took fresh flowers. She walked to the church, placed the flowers at the altar. Then she walked towards the forest, alone, always alone. Nobody knew what happened after that. 40 Wednesdays passed. 40. Every Wednesday, Zola returned to the church. She wore white. She carried flowers. She prayed. Then she walked into the forest. People watched. Nobody followed. They had learned to leave Mrs. Wednesday alone. But on the 40th Wednesday, something changed. Zola walked deeper than usual, past the old mango tree, past the narrow stream, past the place where the sunlight almost disappeared. Then she heard a voice. "Zola." She stopped. Slowly, she turned. An old woman stood between the trees. Nobody knew where she had come from. She looked ancient. Her hair was completely white. Her skin was dark and wrinkled. She wore a simple brown wrapper, and around her neck hung a strange wooden necklace. Zola stared at her. "Who are you?" The woman smiled. "You have waited long enough." Zola's heart jumped. The woman reached into a small woven bag. Then she brought out a tiny wooden box. She placed it in her hands. "Take this." Zola opened it. Inside was one strange seed, small, dark, almost black. Zola looked up. "What should I do with it?" The woman answered only one thing. "Plant it." "Where?" The woman pointed toward the ground. "Where your tears fell." Before Zola could ask another question, the woman disappeared behind the trees. Zola stood there, confused. She looked around. Nothing. No footsteps, no sound. Only the wind. She looked down at the seed. Then she smiled. "All right." The next morning, Zola planted it. Right beside the church, exactly where she had cried on her wedding day. She watered it, then she went to work. Days passed. Nothing happened. People laughed again. Mrs. Wednesday had started planting magic seeds. Zola ignored them. 1 week passed, then 2, then 3. On the 23rd day, someone screamed. Water was coming out of the ground. At first, it was only a small stream. Then it grew. Clear water pushed through the dry earth. People ran toward it. Nobody understood. The village had never had water there. Zola stood silently, watching. Then an old farmer noticed something beneath the wet ground. He said, "Wait." He bent down. He touched the soil. His eyes widened. He said, "This is clay." But not ordinary clay. It was rare healing clay. Scientists later came. They tested it. They were shocked. The clay had unusual healing properties. Soon, people began arriving from other towns, then other states, then other countries. And that was only the beginning. Under Zola's land, they found something else. Gemstones, beautiful stones buried deep beneath the earth. Then came medicinal plants, rare plants, plants that had almost disappeared from the region. Investors arrived, universities arrived, doctors arrived, companies arrived. Everyone wanted to work with Zola. But Zola did something nobody expected. She did not build a mansion first. She built a hospital, then another, then schools, then water systems, then farms. She opened scholarships. She helped widows start businesses. And somehow, everything she touched multiplied. A small farm became a large company. A small clinic became a major hospital. A simple school became an education network. Money came, but Zola did not change. She still woke early. She still greeted the old women. She still visited her school. And every Wednesday, she still wore white. People stopped calling her crazy. They stopped laughing. They stopped whispering. Instead, they bowed when she walked past. Kings visited her. Chiefs waited for meetings. Governors came asking for advice. Business leaders traveled across the country to sit with her.
Even powerful people from other nations requested meetings. But Zola never forgot the woman she used to be. The woman who ate alone, the woman people pitied, the woman who stood at an altar waiting for a groom who never came. She remembered every insult, not with anger, with gratitude, because now she understood something. Her humiliation had not destroyed her, it had redirected her. 10 years after that impossible wedding, Zola was one of the wealthiest women in Africa. Her foundation had transformed entire communities. Hospitals carried her name, schools carried her name, widows called her their mother, children called her their hope, and the people of Okoro gave her a new name, Mother Wednesday. Nobody laughed anymore. But there was still one question the village could not answer. Why had Soma disappeared? Years passed. Then a rainy afternoon, a strange car stopped outside Zola's compound. An old man stepped out. He looked weak. His clothes were dusty. His hair had turned grey. His face carried years of fear. Zola was sitting beneath a veranda when she saw him. She stood. Her heart stopped. She knew that face. It was Soma, the groom who disappeared, the man who had left her standing at the altar. He walked toward her slowly, then stopped. He could barely look into her eyes. Zola? She said nothing. His hands trembled. On your wedding morning, I was coming to marry you. Zola's eyes narrowed. Then why did you disappear? Soma looked toward the forest. His face changed. I met someone. Who? He shook his head. I don't know. She looked exactly like you. Zola froze. Soma continued. She was standing near the forest. She smiled at me. Then she told me something. His voice dropped. If you marry her today, she dies before sunset. Zola stared at him. Soma's eyes filled with tears. I was terrified, so I ran. I never came back, not because I stopped loving you, but because I believed I was saving your life. Zola slowly looked toward the ancient trees. Soma continued, I have seen that woman's face every night for years. She looked exactly like you. Silence. A cold breeze moved across the compound. Zola's white dress lifted gently. She stared at the forest, the same trees, the same place where the old woman had appeared. And suddenly, one question entered her mind. If the woman Soma saw looked exactly like her, Soma had disappeared, but Zola had found her destiny. The seed had appeared. The fortune had come. The mysterious old woman had vanished. And somewhere beyond those ancient trees, something was still watching and smiling.
Years passed after Soma returned, but one question never left Zola's heart. Why had that woman looked exactly like her? One evening, Father Emmanuel called Zola to his room. The old priest was very weak. His hair was completely white. His breathing was slow. He looked at her and smiled. My daughter, I knew this day would come. Zola sat beside him. Father, who was that woman? Father Emmanuel closed his eyes. Then he spoke. She was not your enemy. She was the keeper of an ancient covenant. Zola listened. Many generations ago, the elders of this land made a covenant with destiny. Once every 100 years, one woman would be chosen, not to become someone's wife, but to become a bride of destiny. Zola's eyes widened. A bride? Father Emmanuel nodded. Her life would belong to something bigger than herself. She would protect the helpless, build communities, lift the forgotten, change generations. Then came the truth that broke Zola's heart. If you had married Soma, you would have lived a beautiful life. A husband, children, a peaceful home. Zola lowered her head. But thousands of widows would never have found help. Children would never have received education. Those hospitals would never have been built. The village would never have changed. Father Emmanuel reached for her hand. Your humiliation was not a punishment, Zola. It was a redirection. Tears filled her eyes. Suddenly, everything made sense. The dreams, the voice, the tree, the seed, the strange woman, even Soma's fear. He had not abandoned her. He had been warned away. And the woman he saw, she was the guardian of the covenant. Zola finally understood why she always felt peace whenever she entered the forest. She had never been lost there. She had been home. Years later, Zola adopted children. She gave them the love she once dreamed of giving her own family. She raised them, educated them, loved them, and lived a full, beautiful life. She became wealthy, but more importantly, she became useful. She became Mother Wednesday. And when people asked her about the wedding that changed everything, she simply smiled. Sometimes, she would say, the door that closes is protecting you from the life you are never meant to live. So remember this. Do not mock someone's delay. Do not call someone's disappointment a curse. Sometimes, what looks like rejection is redirection. Sometimes, the thing you cried over is the very thing leading you toward your purpose. And sometimes, what looks like the end of your story is only the beginning. If this story touched your heart, subscribe to the channel, turn on notifications, and tell us in the comments, would you have stayed at the altar for 3 days like Zola? And if you are in her shoes, would you have married the wedding?